The barn door exploded inward, not from force, but from pure, unadulterated audacity. Brenda Fax, president of the Whispering Pines HOA, stood there, smugly beside a pair of landscapers wielding bolt cutters like ceremonial swords. I barely had time to finish shouting, "Don't touch that lock," before it clattered to the ground, severed and useless. The men yanked open the heavy wooden doors, and there, sitting calmly on a hay bale beneath a flickering overhead bulb, was Sheriff Dunley. His boots were crossed, his shotgun rested lightly on his lap, and he held a half-drunk thermos of coffee. "Took you long enough," he said, with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. 2 hours earlier, I'd been trimming hedges with kitchen scissors, an act of small, ridiculous HOA defiance I'd grown far too comfortable with, when I found the anonymous warning letter in my mailbox. It wasn't mailed. It wasn't signed. It was just a folded sheet of printer paper that read, "Your barn is in violation. Inspection at 2 p.m. Do not resist." I'd laughed, because resisting the HOA was my new favorite hobby. Whispering Pines was supposed to be my wife Ellie's and my escape from city chaos, not a boot camp for obsessive lawn enforcers. But Ellie, my far more intuitive half, didn't find it funny. She always suspected there was something deeply weird about the HOA. Not just the weekly infractions taped to our door, once for having a bird bath too reflective, once for planting unauthorized lavender, but the eyes. The cameras hidden in fake mailboxes. The drone that buzzed only above our property. The elderly man with binoculars who claimed to be bird watching but never looked up. We'd joked about it for months, until the barn started getting the same strange attention. I built that barn with my own hands. It wasn't much, just a glorified shed with charm, but it was my piece of the place. I kept old records there, some tools, Ellie's failed ceramic projects she refused to part with. Nothing illegal, nothing dangerous, just memories. Or so I thought. When the HOA rolled up in a convoy of electric golf carts and branded windbreakers, I had already phoned the sheriff to report trespassing. The dispatcher said Sheriff Dunley was unavailable. I didn't know then that was a lie. Sheriff Dunley was already inside the barn, waiting for the show. The moment the lock hit the ground, everything unraveled. Dunley stood, racked the shotgun for effect, and leveled it right at Brenda's clipboard. "Well, now," he said, dry and low. "I believe you just broke and entered." Brenda blinked, her face going pale beneath the heavy makeup. "You can't be serious. This is a compliance inspection authorized under Section 42 of the HOA Covenant." Dunley laughed, a sound like grinding stones. "Ma'am, I'm law in this county. That piece of paper doesn't outrank me, and you just stepped into a sealed structure related to an ongoing investigation. So, unless you got a badge and a warrant in that fanny pack, I suggest you sit down and shut up." Panic rippled across the group. One board member whimpered. Another turned and sprinted straight into a pitchfork stored leaning against the wall. Ellie arrived moments later, gravel crunching under her tires as she skidded to a stop beside the barn. She saw the sheriff, the HOA in hysterics, and me standing with a face that said I had just learned my backyard hobby, shed, might be a federal crime scene. She walked right up to Sheriff Dunley and said, "You want to explain what the hell you're doing in my barn?" Dunley nodded toward the sawdust-covered floor. "You got a trapdoor?" "We don't have a trapdoor." "You do now?" We all looked down. In the floor, partially swept clean by the sheriff's boot, was a square outline. I knelt beside it, brushed back more debris, and found a recessed handle. No hinges, just a wooden lid inlaid so seamlessly it looked like part of the floor. "I didn't build that," I said. Dunley pulled out a small crowbar, handed it to me. "Then let's see who did." The door creaked up, and the air that escaped wasn't musty or stale. It smelled faintly of motor oil and something else, something metallic. The sheriff flicked on a flashlight and descended the narrow wooden steps. I followed him, against every instinct I had. Ellie stayed at the top, arms crossed, eyes narrowed at Brenda, who had somehow already started making phone calls through tears. The basement, no, the bunker, was crude but expansive. Corrugated walls, boxes, shelves of binders, and something else in the far corner under a tarp. Dunley yanked it off and revealed a stack of VHS tapes, hundreds of them, each labeled by date and address. Dunley picked one up. "Whispering Pines, 1998, 402, Larks Lane." "I thought that house didn't exist until 2002, I said quietly. "It didn't. Dunley replied, his face suddenly hard. Which makes this a problem. You sure you didn't know about this? Sheriff, I bought this property 3 years ago. That trapdoor was buried under 6 inches of concrete, sawdust, and regret. The sheriff smirked. Then you inherited more than just bad insulation. Upstairs, Brenda was still protesting. You can't arrest me. I was doing my duty. Dunley climbed out of the basement and slapped cuffs on her like he was swatting a mosquito. You trespassed. You destroyed property. And if any of those tapes down there show what I think they do, you're going away for a long time. But it's just a barn. Brenda cried. No, he said, securing the cuffs. It's a vault. Later that night, after the HOA was escorted off the property and the barn was wrapped in caution tape, Ellie and I sat on our porch in stunned silence. What do you think is on those tapes? Ellie finally asked. I don't know, I said. I do, she replied, her voice low. They're watching us. They've always been watching us. The silence lingered just long enough for the mailbox to creak open again. A new letter slid through. I walked over, picked it up, and read it under the porch light. Failure to secure structure. Violation code 3.8a. Fines to be assessed. Repeat offenses may result in property reassignment. Ellie didn't laugh this time. Neither did I. The next morning, I awoke to find a dead squirrel nailed to our front door. A tiny HOA citation was pinned to its chest. Unauthorized Wildlife Interference Code 6.1d. This wasn't just petty. This was a message sent from a suburban mafia. The sheriff had confiscated the tapes from the barn, or so he claimed, but when I asked for a copy, Dunley just laughed. Not everything's for public consumption, Carver. That didn't sit right. It was our barn, our land. Ellie wasn't content to wait around. We drove into town and visited the zoning office. We spent 3 hours in a windowless basement scrolling through reel after reel of microfilm. Finally, Ellie gasped. Here, look at this. 1987. This land was part of a seizure program, federal civil asset forfeiture. It belonged to someone named Franklin H. Pute. He's listed as a founding donor of the Whispering Pines HOA, Ellie discovered. The same man who had his land seized by the government somehow helped found the community that later enforced the rules on it. The barn wasn't an accident or a leftover relic. It had history. Ugly, undocumented history. I leaned back in the squeaky chair. So, let me get this straight. We're living on land that was taken from a guy with probable ties to criminal activity. Then, it was restructured into a planned community, and now it's got a trapdoor full of tapes and secrets. Ellie nodded. Sheriff Dunley is already sitting on that bunker like a dragon hoarding incriminating home videos. As we left the office, a sleek black SUV rolled up and parked next to our car. The driver was in his 60s, wore a bow tie and aviator sunglasses, and had a tan like he lived inside a tanning booth. You Mitch Carver? I was cautious. Who's asking? Name's Dale Pute, he said, extending a business card that read, Pute Land Holdings, Strategic Acquisitions. The same last name as the original seized owner. He spoke with a slow draw, but his tone carried menace hidden behind charm. I represent interests that are personally invested in your property. I've got a simple offer. Sell the land. Vacate in 30 days. We'll pay you double what you paid for it. Why would I do that? Because, Dale said, his smile widening. You opened something that wasn't meant to be reopened. And now a lot of people are very nervous. Best you walk away before things get sticky. With that, Dale drove off, the slow, deliberate roll of his tires feeling more like a countdown than a departure. Back home, we found a second letter, unauthorized access to sealed structure code 4.9e, HOA review pending. The quiet of Whispering Pines wasn't just eerie. It felt curated. No dogs barking, no kids playing. It was as if the neighborhood was holding its breath. I took a walk and found myself outside the home of Ted Wexler, a mild-mannered retiree. The lights were off. Mail stacked in the box. Ted hadn't been seen since the barn incident. Inside, the door was unlocked. A stack of boxes labeled HOA Archive sat open. VHS tapes. One said, Ellie Carver, May 12th. That was last week, Ellie whispered later. We're being watched. That night, we sat in the dark. We're not just dealing with a corrupt HOA, I said softly. We're dealing with something else, something bigger. These tapes aren't about violations. They're about control. Just as things became unbearable, a knock came on the back door. It was a teenage girl holding a grocery bag filled with tapes and a Walkman. My name's Amber. she said, scanning everything nervously. I'm Ted Wexler's granddaughter. He's missing. You're the only people who seem like they're not part of this freak show, so I figured I'd try here before I vanished, too. Ted had left a cryptic voicemail. If something happens to me, go to the Carvers. We took one of Amber's tapes, popped it into an old VCR. The footage was grainy, timestamped 2003, pointed at the HOA clubhouse. People were handing over thick envelopes. At one point, a man walked out in handcuffs, escorted not by police, but by two HOA board members, Brenda Fax and Marlene Winslow, the original president and one of the town's founding residents. It's not just surveillance, Ellie realized. It's leverage. We spent hours cataloging the files. Town meetings held at night. Unmarked vans pulling into driveways. On one tape, a man was seen walking into the woods behind the community trail with what looked like a shovel and a duffel bag. He never came back. Ellie discovered a reference in the community charter to something called Red Home Classification, status pending removal. I knew we had to find more. Amber kept lookout while I broke into the HOA headquarters, a move that now felt more like civil service than crime. I found the presidential access-only binder labeled 23 profiles with red stickers. Each file ended the same way, status pending removal. I took photos of every page. Just as I was closing the door, voices echoed through the hall. One of them was Dale Pute. The other, Sheriff Dunley. I'm telling you, Dale said, they're digging fast. We need to accelerate the plan. We can't rush this, Dunley replied. Too many eyes on the place after the barn stunt. We need to make it look clean. What about Wexler? Handled. But his granddaughter's snooping. If she talks to the Carvers, it's over. They left. When we returned home, Brenda Fax was pacing in the yard, frantic, her blouse wrinkled. They're going to kill me, she whispered. I need your help. She wasn't the composed tyrant anymore. She was a woman unraveling. She shoved a flash drive into Ellie's hand. It's all on here. Every deal. Every payoff. Every red file. Why us? I asked quietly. Because you're already on the list, Brenda whispered. That means you're dangerous to them. And if you're dangerous, it means you might just be the only people who can burn it all down. Ellie cracked the flash drive's encryption. What opened was a digital bloodbath. Audio recordings, spreadsheets, and scanned handwritten notes. A spreadsheet titled Asset Retention Strategy Phase 4 listed addresses, homeowners, and net profits post-removal. Our address was marked discard. Internal enforcement logs detailed forced acquisitions and surveillance routes. The most disturbing file was audio meetings. Sheriff Dunley's voice clearly stating, "Make him angry enough and they'll hang themselves with the rule book." Everything we'd suspected was now documented with timestamps and signatures. We weren't paranoid. We were targets. Ellie pulled out her phone and called someone she hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. A journalist named Rachel Quinn, who had once exposed a housing scam. Remember that favor you owe me? It's time to pay up. Rachel arrived, spent 2 hours verifying the files. This is dynamite, she said. If we air this, we're talking state officials, financial institutions, even your friendly neighborhood sheriff. The plan was simple. Rachel would begin piecing together a documentary special while I did the unthinkable. I RSVP'd to the next HOA meeting, and I brought cookies. The monthly meeting was tense. Dale Pute was there, sitting beside Dunley. I stood up during resident concerns and said I wanted to address the group. I pulled out a projector from my backpack and clicked play. The first clip was simple, a video of Brenda and Marlene Winslow counting bribes in a back room. The second was audio, Dunley ordering a surveillance drone deployment over specific addresses without warrants. The third was a spreadsheet showing projected profits from forcibly evicting homeowners deemed non-cooperative. The room erupted. People shouted questions, demanded explanations. One man threw his HOA handbook at Dale's head. Someone else tried to tackle Dunley, who left the room in a hurry. I left the projector running as I walked out, the sound of chaos echoing behind me. But the victory was short-lived. That night, someone tried to burn the barn down. Arsonists used gasoline and rags. I grabbed the hose and sprinted outside barefoot, dousing the fire before it could spread. The message was clear. Stop, or you'll be next. Then the next blow came. The sheriff's office called. Not Dunley, but a deputy named Cross. They said an anonymous complaint had been filed against me for criminal trespass and unlawful data possession. A warrant was pending within 24 hours. They were not going down easy. By morning, Rachel had coordinated a secure upload of the files to 3 media outlets. They'd kicked the hornet's nest. Mitch and Ellie had to meet Dunley and Dale Pute one last time. Meeting moved. Now below, we arrived at the garden center, disguised as curious shoppers. We descended the narrow, creaking staircase to the steel-doored bunker. Inside, 6 people sat around a long table. Dale Pute, Sheriff Dunley, and 2 men in tailored suits. "You came," Dale said. "That shows sense. We've made mistakes. But what do you think happens when people realize their lovely community was built on deception and corruption? You think property values go up? I'm offering stability. Sell. Leave. We'll make it worth your while." Ellie looked him dead in the eye. "That's the problem. People keep disappearing." I reached into my coat and pulled out the flash drive. "You want to play that game? Here's the real list. Every red file, every secret vote, every recorded meeting, including this one." The 2 suited men exchanged glances. "You release that," Dale said slowly. "You'll destroy more than just the HOA." "Good," Ellie said. Back at the house, media outlets were picking up the story by the hour. Neighbors began knocking on the door, not to threaten, but to offer help. An elderly man brought a box of his own VHS tapes from the 90s. The community was waking up. State investigators arrived. The FBI was involved. The final showdown wasn't just a local police matter. Dunley was suspended pending investigation. Dale Pute was subpoenaed and vanished before he could testify. Brenda resurfaced with a full confession on video. The ultimate confrontation was the emergency town hall on the soccer field. Residents came in sweatshirts and pajamas, curious, worried, ready for answers. Rachel's final 10-minute documentary summary played on the projector. No one clapped. There was no applause for betrayal. Ellie took the mic. "We didn't want to start a war. We wanted peace and quiet. But they made this personal. They made it about power." I followed. What's been exposed here isn't just about Whispering Pines. It's about every place where power hides behind paperwork, where rules are weaponized. The final count was unanimous. Mitch Carver was elected interim president of the HOA. The crowd stood in silence, watching me like a man who just inherited a bomb with a ticking clock. The first thing I did was declare a freeze on all active violations. No more fines, no more threats. I ordered a full audit and requested federal oversight. The barn was repurposed into a community archive. The tapes, the notes, even the trapdoor itself left as it was, a reminder. Weeks passed. The old order dissolved. Brenda's fate was sealed by her confession. One cold morning, a letter appeared. "See you soon. Code 4-3 Compliance Unit." I smiled. "Guess we're not quite done yet." Ellie smirked. "Nope. But now we're ready." This wasn't just about my barn. It was about exposing the rot underneath the perfectly manicured lawn, the dark truth about who really owned the neighborhood. So tell me, if you inherited land with a secret bunker full of evidence, would you have gone to the police first or to the media? And how do you protect your privacy when the person watching you is the one in charge of enforcing the rules? Drop your comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories about the long, quiet war against the clipboard tyrants.